This is the JNFAB topic analysis for critical affirmatives. So this topic is resolved. Plea bargaining ought to be abolished in the United States criminal justice system. So the first question is, what is plea bargaining? So plea bargaining is when a defendant is faced with the choice of going to trial or pleading guilty to a lesser crime. And give up their ability to go to trial. So in 1978, the Supreme Court ruled that prosecutors can threaten defendants with life imprisonment, and plea bargaining with prosecutors threatening some larger sentence does not violate the constitutional right to trial. The vast majority of cases, both in federal and state, as well as civil and criminal trials, end in a plea deal. Like, the numbers range, but it's somewhere between 90 and 98% of cases end in a plea deal, which means this is a very, very relevant topic to the way that society operates right now. So the general reading of this resolution would imply that the affirmative would defend that all plea bargaining is abolished and all cases will go to trial. So that's the main app on this topic. But you could also choose to write an app that specifies something, either a type of case that would not have plea bargaining, or an identity like white people or white males, people with disabilities, etc. Something to watch out for is that, especially when you're writing a critical affirmative, is that even if there are a lot of things wrong with plea bargaining, why would that mean that we should necessarily take that option away from people? I.e., it seems a little bit paternalistic to say, oh, plea bargaining is bad, that you should not even have an option. And I'll talk about how to answer this with the variety of asks that I'll talk about, but the main thing is to emphasize that plea bargaining is not really a choice, because you are threatened with something. So there are two kind of ways that I think it's interesting to think about how you will justify your app. So the first way that you could kind of focus on this app is focusing on the innocent people. So the framing of that would be something like the prison system is very bad. Obviously, mass incarceration is horrific. And thus we should do everything possible to get people out of prison and to give less power to the criminal justice system. Specifically, innocent people should not have to plead guilty just to get out of the situation that they're in. And this is obviously not an exclusive focus on the innocent. It's just a pretty much a critique of the power of the prison system. The second way you could justify your act was with a focus on the guilty people. The framing of this app would be something like, plea deals allow people who are guilty of very, very bad crimes like murder, sexual violence, etc., to get off with pleading guilty to lesser crimes, and thus lesser sentences. And thus we should abolish plea deals to make sure that justice is served and the correct amount of time and punishment is given to the person who committed the crime. And these two ways are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can focus on the importance of judicial legitimacy and innocent people being let go, while guilty people are given the correct punishment. But it is important to try to distinguish the way that what type of app mindset you're going into, because how you're going to answer negative positions is very much dependent on that. Especially answering critiques, if you're focusing a lot on retribution, i.e. the second focus on the guilty, it's going to be harder to answer cases that are a critique of the state power, critique of the criminal justice system, etc. So given that a huge amount of people accept plea deals, it raises the question of why would you accept a plea deal, if you know you're innocent, especially. So the reason that people accept plea deals is because prosecutors have an enormous amount of power. Prosecutors can threaten huge sentences, especially given mandatory minimums. They can even threaten like the death penalty, which means if you're faced with the risk of losing in trial, even if you know you're innocent, you're probably going to plead guilty. So for example, if you know you're innocent, and you could take a plea deal and get 8 years in prison versus going to trial and risk getting the life sentence, you're probably going to choose the 8 years in prison. This is especially harmful for people who are not wealthy, especially communities of color, low-income communities, because they cannot afford a strong defense, as well as their lawyer might not be super equipped to tell them what are their chances at going to trial and winning at trial, as well as the fact that a lot of people cannot post bail and get out of jail and go home while they're awaiting their trial. So instead of waiting months or even years in prison awaiting trial, you'll plead guilty to get out, even if you're innocent. Prosecutors also want to offer plea deals to people who are guilty of certain crimes, especially lower level drug crimes, because they can get information about higher up, like, drug criminals. So we're going to start by talking about specifying different types of cases and identities to get plea bargaining. So not the whole resolution, but specifying. So the first critical affirmative that you can use that you can specify would be abolishing plea bargaining in sexual assault cases. So there are hundreds of cases that end of rape cases that end in plea deal, and charges of rape or attempted rape are often dropped to lesser charges like assault or even sexual conduct with a minor, and then the defendant would plead guilty. The problem with this is that the person accused will be out a lot sooner, and the defendant may feel compelled to commit a similar act of violence because they feel like they can get away with it, as well as the fact that they don't even have to admit that they committed the crime in the first place. It also prevents the victims from speaking out, because if there's no trial, there's no ability for the victim to even say anything about what they went through or what their thoughts are. So this app could have framing about toxic masculinity and the rape culture of the United States, and the disproportionate punishment of people who commit sexual assaults. A potential problem with this app is that it's very much based on retribution instead of rehabilitation, which means it's susceptible to a lot of critiques of the criminal justice system and the legal system and on punishment and stuff like that. So that would be something to be aware of when you're framing your app. The next type of app that you can specify would be abolishing plea bargaining for illegal immigrant defendants. So there have been a lot of cases in which legal immigrants plead guilty to misdemeanors, which gives under federal law, they are much more likely to be deported if they plead guilty. So the affirmative would have some analysis about how immigration is good, borders are bad, strict border policing is bad. Some problems with this would be that in some districts, prosecutors give plea deals to illegal immigrants in order so that they will avoid deportations. So ending plea bargains for illegal immigrants would potentially increase the amount of deportations, but there's a lot of debate over this, so it's definitely something that you can hedge against. One way to solve this problem is by having illegal immigrants kind of just be an advantage to a different app. So a lot of the crime that illegal immigrants take plea deals for are for low-level misdemeanor drug crimes. So if you abolish plea deals on those types of crimes, it would help illegal immigrants from being deported. And this also has the same problem for every other app on this topic. There's always the risk that if you go to trial, you're going to lose. So you have to figure out, is that worth the risk? If there are no plea deals, how are you going to hedge against the fact that you might lose at trial? The next type of specific app that we're going to talk about is abolishing the death penalty. So this could come in two ways. So it could either be abolish the ability for prosecutors to use the death penalty to incentivize plea deals, which was a Supreme Court case which ruled that this was okay. And this version of the app would probably not be topical because it's not really abolishing plea deals. Or you could abolish plea bargaining with the framing an advantage about biopolitical control of a death penalty, so it could be more of offense instead of necessarily the advocacy. But the framing of this app, either way, would be about biopower and the state's ability to control the life and death of a person, i.e., it seems intuitively true that the state should not be able to say, I'm going to kill you if you don't do what I say. And to threaten death is an exercise in biopolitical state power, which spills over to this whole power that the state has to control the lives and deaths of populations, which is bad. So I think this could be a really cool app, and it would also answer case very well because it's a critique of state power, and the offense would not necessarily be consequentialist, which means it avoids a lot of turns. So the next act we're going to talk about is the main critical whole resolution act. You could have a structural violence-based or more soft-left act on this topic, in which you have an advantage of one of the previous acts, so you just talk about how it will decrease prisons, etc. But a more radical way that you could frame this act would be having framing about abolishing the prison industrial complex and the criminal justice system altogether. And given that so many cases, the vast majority of cases end in plea deals, the abolition of plea bargaining would result in a huge flooding of the criminal justice system. The courts, the prison systems, the jails would all be overcrowded. So it would force policymakers to choose what to do about mass incarceration, and would result potentially in decriminalization and legalization of certain things, as well as a scale back in the result of mass incarceration. So the main thing that this act would be saying is that if there's no plea bargaining and everything goes to trial, the state would be forced to figure out what to do, and their solution would probably be to curtail mass incarceration, which would be good because it's a step towards abolishing the prison industrial complex. This would also have more framing about the prosecutor power in plea deals, because there was very little oversight on prosecutors. They were given large amount of powers, and there's no standards of evidence or proof, which means prosecutors have enormous amount of power that defendants do not have any ability to respond to. So it's not really a choice for plea deals. The advantage of this act would be that it would impact a major disadvantage on this topic, i.e. court clock, which is good because it obviously would avoid having to answer that, and it also answers case very well because it's a step towards the abolition of the prison industrial complex. And this framing would be an analysis of the way that the legacy of slavery is left within the prison industrial complex. There's a lot of literature, especially with this author named Dylan, about how neoliberalism and slavery has resulted in the prison industrial complex to create systems of racial control that are not just, they're not legitimate, and they're not choices that people can make. In this article by this author named Heimer, talks about how plea deals are not a free choice, but a way for prosecutors to continue this process of what's called racial entrapment, to trap Black Americans into this system of racial control. So the main things to think about when you're writing your app for this topic is how to answer the common negative responses. Common critiques on this topic are going to be critiques of the legal system and biopower, and critiques of prisons, like abolition critiques. So either going further right in defending the criminal justice system is a good thing, retribution is a good thing, or making your app more radical and defending reformism in a more radical way is a way to hedge against us. So this author named Julia Sudbury talks about how there are these things called non-reformist reforms, in which even if we're looking to abolish the prison industrial complex, or the prison industrial complex is very, very bad, we need to be able to take small-scale steps to reduce the amount of people in the prison industrial complex. So that could be a good poem argument on these types of radical critiques. The second thing to be thinking about is whether you want to be focusing on the abolition of the prison industrial complex and talking about why it's so bad and scaling back the power of the prison industrial complex, or doing the opposite, i.e. focusing on retribution and making sure people get their just desserts if they are convicted of a crime that they did, like sexual assault.